insert generic video opening here. So the newer campaign I'm playing in is the Curse of Strahd game, and in it, there's a lot of hags. In case nobody told you, there's a lot of creepy old ladies that want to eat your liver. So, fought several of them at this point, and hags in the majority of hags in the base game. I'm going to call it base game. I don't know why. That's actually a fighting game thing. Fighting game vernacular is creeping in. But like normal hags and like the Monster Manual, Volos and stuff, they're fine. But like one mechanic in particular that night hags have really stuck out to me. They have a feature that effectively just lets them cast the Etherealness spell as at will. Like, it doesn't say that it's not a spell, but it basically just does the same thing. They can shift into the ethereal plane as an action, and then it lasts for like 8 hours, and then at any point they can shift back. They can just kind of do it, which is interesting. It allows them to like completely avoid detection and basically go wherever the fuck they want, because they can phase through walls in the ethereal plane. Like, it doesn't matter. But it also lets them completely escape situations if they need to, unless they're caught at lower HP and they need to, what do you call it? And it doesn't come back to their turn quickly enough for them to shift before they get killed, which will happen sometimes. But it also creates this situation where, like, if you're fighting a group of hags, one of them is almost guaranteed to get away, because it's going to see its sisters are dead, and then it's going to go, oh no, and leave, which is good. That's in the creature's best interest. It's how this creature would behave based on how it's supposed to behave. But mechanically, in the combat, it's sort of not very interesting, and it's more in the player's favor than anything else, unless the monster runs away. If the Night Hag chooses to phase back in and continue the fight, well, the Night Hag effectively just used 2 turns to move, whereas the players, while the Night Hag was ethereal, sure, they couldn't directly attack it, but they could heal, they could prep something, they could switch weapons out, they could activate things, whatever they want. And then when the Night Hag comes back, well, okay, now everyone can do their things. Maybe they readied an action, and they just, the Barbarian readied a javelin, and as soon as the Night Hag appears, he just fucking, ready a javelin throw, and the Night Hag appears, as a reaction. So you kind of didn't lose that turn. So it's pretty far in the player's favor. Yeah, I guess I'll just turn this way. These roads are weird down here. Anyway, so it got me thinking, what's a way to make that less in the player's favor and more interactive, more frenetic and chaotic feeling, like the players aren't going to be able to just figure out what's going to happen, or make it more dangerous, or whatever word you want to use. So got me thinking, well, what if the Night Hag still has this kind of ability to go ethereal, but how do you make it dangerous? Well, first, a simple way is to come back into the material plane. It doesn't cost an action. It either costs a bonus action or it costs nothing. There's a giant friggin' crane truck turning. Okay. I didn't have to move. That would make it more dangerous, but it's not super interactive and it's not particularly interesting. And also the players can still ready an action for when she comes back. So a little idea I had was, instead of the way it works now instead of the way it currently works, which I already explained, instead, again, action, you phase into the ethereal plane, but whether you want to make this a legendary action or you just want to make it part of the monster's abilities, just like instead of it could use legendary actions if you want to paint it that way, especially if this is like a boss and you want to limit this a little bit, but say at a higher level, or if maybe the monster is not as physically strong but it's more magically inclined, it's got a better handle on this ability. Just as an action, on its turn, it phases into the ethereal plane. And then, at the end of each creature's turn, within, like, say, just because you have to give it a radius, say within 60 feet, maybe 30 feet, whatever, doesn't matter. Within 30 feet of where the night hag was on the material plane, within 30 feet of that area, at the end of a hostile creature's turn, so a creature that's hostile to the night hag, in this case our player characters, at the end of a hostile creature's turn, the night hag can make one attack on it from the ethereal plane. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense why an ethereal creature can just attack a creature on the material plane, but I don't fucking care. We'll figure out a way to make it work later. Like how that works in like lore mechanics, I don't care. But the night hag can make an attack on this creature at the end of its turn. Then the attack if you want to, you can give it some limiters. You could give it disadvantage, which is huge. You could make it just do half damage. That's, I think, reasonable. And of course, you want to make it just do half damage, like lower the damage die. So if like they do a D8 with their claws, make it do a D4 instead. But the modifier is the same. And also, then it doesn't like invalidate a barbarian's resistance if you happen to have a barbarian in the party, or if they have resistances to stuff somehow. So at the end of every creature's turn, the night hag can make an attack on that creature without using a reaction. Maybe make it a legendary action if you want. It doesn't have to be. You can just make this free. But then, as a reaction, that player that was attacked can do something. Maybe they can just make an attack of opportunity on it. Maybe it depends on the character. Maybe any kind of spellcaster. Maybe they can make like a melee spell attack, like a special melee spell attack you can only do in this scenario, where you just kind of try to punch her from across the plains. And if successful, you can rip her out of the ethereal plane. Something like that. And of course, especially if you have some way for the players to interact with this and use their reaction to rip her back to the material plane, well now, the players get a way to like stop this, built right into the creature. They don't have to go out of their way to like have a certain spell prepared or have like certain magic items ready. It's just built into the creature's mechanics that you can just interact with this and rip her back to reality, and then continue to beat the shit out of her. Something like that, or maybe you could make it a mechanic similar to death saves, like the night hag gets to make an attack, and then that player can, as a reaction, make an attack of opportunity or whatever you decide. Maybe it's contextual based on that particular character. character. Like a martial character would just make weapon attack, some sort of like a wizard or a cleric would make like a melee spell attack, like just a magical palm strike or something. You know, a monk would do some sort of key channel punch, key channel like acupuncture point, you know, whatever it is. Maybe a rogue would only be able to dodge the attack, but if they successfully dodge it as a reaction, then they can do something. But then if for every time a player gets to use their reaction and do this special thing, then the Night Hag accrues 1 ethereal failure. And if it accrues 3 ethereal failures, then it is shunted from the ethereal plane and forced back onto the material plane. And it takes some damage in the process because reward the players. So you get to keep that flavor of this Night Hag disappearing and striking at you from nowhere. But the players, being these heroic characters, can kind of do something about it, interact, and attack this creature from across the different planes of existence to rip her back onto this plane. Something like that. And it's like these are the types of things I like to include in the monsters I design. I don't want to call them gimmicks, but because gimmicks, especially in like fighting game spaces and certain other spaces, gimmicks will always have a negative connotation. It's more so they'll have like I want to call them a unique mechanic that is relatively strong, has a little bit of complexity, but is easy enough to understand for the players right off the bat. Things like, I don't know if you, the viewer, may have watched my video on homebrewing a horror monster, where I made this monster that has this paralyzing stare, and then as a legendary action, it can move 1 space towards creatures it has paralyzed. And then it can take this swing with its left-handed claw, which actually has negative modifiers to hit. But if it's up close and personal with a paralyzed creature, guess what? That attack is automatically a critical, and it doesn't fucking matter. So it's got this incredibly strong attack that it's going to have a very difficult time actually hitting with. But it has this paralyzing stare that can guarantee a crit, and to really dial in that horror flavor, it's got, as legendary actions, it can take small steps towards its paralyzed target. Towards its paralyzed target. So you kind of capture, I feel like that captures the feel of a horror movie monster pretty effectively. But again, that's just one example. And for this Night Hag, I think a Night Hag being able to disappear and then still attack you continually, I think that works pretty well too. You can accomplish the same thing by just giving it greater invisibility, and then the players have to just like kind of take swings at it on their turns. But this lets them like keep their turns, but they can also do this as reactions. So it feels like it feels like more of a like special thing. It feels more unique. So yeah, that's just a thought on like an example of how I might change a monster and homebrew it a little bit. But I do have to say that it is always easier to homebrew, like just to modify something, than it is to completely come up with something new. Night Hags are a really cool monster from a lore perspective, but as always, I feel like everything's mechanics could all use some sprucing up here and there. So by doing something like that, it makes it a little more interactive. But once again, as always, I'm rambling now. Yeah, that's it.